Namaskar everyone and welcome to Desi Talk. I'm your co-host Srishti Prabha, the managing editor at India Currents, and I'm waiting for my co-host Yashu to join. And I see that Yashu has joined. I'm very excited.
Can her comment? Hi,
Did it work?
Yashu. It
Did
worked.
it work?
It worked. Hey,
Yeah.
girl. What's up?
I tried coming in and it wasn't working. Like it kept we it's okay.
I know we
Hi.
always have technical difficulties. I'm not sure why because I feel like we've done this enough times now that there shouldn't be any issues, but every time there's something different, I just don't even know what it is. But
Listen, Instagram just doesn't want us to be great. It's okay. We make it work.
we hype ourselves. We don't need their algorithms. We don't need them.
We don't.
So I'm really excited because today we're going to have an intergenerational dialogue on what a Desi summer is. And for a lot of people, that might be new information because I feel like, growing up, we all had very varying experiences on what we thought it was a normal summer. And it really wasn't because when I went to college, I would hear what a normal summer would end up being for other people. And it would be completely different than what I thought everybody did. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I grew up around a lot of Asian people. So we all kind of had like that immigrant, we were all first generation immigrants and had similar experiences. I don't know if that's the same for you, Yeshu.
Well, before that, let me go ahead and introduce myself. Hey, everyone. This is Desi Talk brought to you by India Currents. I'm your co-host, Yashu Rao, plus model and confidence coach, and of course, founder and CEO of Air Studios, fashion, music, entertainment productions, and of course, my amazing co-host, Apia.
Hi, I mentioned earlier, I'm the managing editor at India Currents, and I am Yeshu's co-host for Desi Talk. Srishti Prabha, if you haven't followed us already, please follow us. India Currents offers a lot of relevant topical information, so we are a credible news source. Definitely, it's for all minority voices, including non-minority voices, just if you want to educate yourself on other cultures. So yes, please follow. Um, that
And
said,
now coming back to your question,
yeah.
just talking about Desi summers, I would say, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so we probably didn't have um, a lot of Indians, like as compared to right now. And I think that's why it's so important that we're having this like generational, conversation, because right now it's like the DMV area is packed
Hmm.
with Desi people. But back when I was growing up, it really wasn't. But for me, my Desi summers would literally be here. I will say this. It is different from a lot of people's narrative, and I'm going to tell you guys why. But it's different and then the same too. As
Okay.
many of our generation,
Yeah.
we used to go to
Well, let's
India,
let's
right?
hold off on talking about what it actually is until we
So,
introduce and bring in our third person. So I want to invite Kanchan, who has been the youth editor at India Currents. She is the teen poet laureate of, I believe, Pleasanton or Dublin. I can't remember, but she'll remind us. And she's been a co-host with me on most of my Desi poetry readings. So I'm going to invite Kanchan. She's a recent graduate from high school, so she's going to be going to University of Chicago come fall. And I think we have a lot to learn from her. So I've added her. Let me know, Kanchan, if you're able to join. Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hey!
Um, Hi everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Srishti. My name is Kanchan Naik, and I'm an incoming freshman at U Chicago. I'm really excited to be a part of this wonderful discussion. And by the way, yes, I'm from Pleasanton.
Okay. I had a feeling it was Pleasanton. I wanted to be sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, Yeshu, I want you to elaborate on your summer, and then Kanchan, you can kind of maybe bounce off of it and tell us if that's like similar or different to your experience. So go ahead, Yeshu. Sorry I cut you off earlier.
oh, no, no problem. So for those of you who are tapping in, the question that we are asking today is how were your Desi summers? How would you spend your Desi summers? What did it consist of? So I'm kicking everyone off here. My Desi summers growing up would alternate every other summer or every other 2 summers with going to India. I come from South India, so every other summer-ish, we would go to my mom's village, and we would spend 3 months out there, June, July, and August, and we would come back. So that would be every other year. And then the years that I wouldn't go to India, now this is where I kind of differ, I think, from a lot of people, and you guys can let me know if this is something. I know a lot of people used to go to like science camp or like writing camp or math camp or some sort of educational thing. But my parents never actually put me or my sister in any of those. Kumon. I remember there was a kid who used to go to Kumon. But my parents never put me in any of those programs. So in the summers, honestly, we would just go to the park and play and ride our bike and like do what American kids supposedly do, you know?
Well, that's lucky.
Right. So that's kind of where my background is, I guess, a little bit different. But Srishti, now that you've said that, I'm curious to know, how did you spend your Desi summers?
So I want to note that, okay, so I grew up in the Bay Area. You grew up in the DMV area. So also, like, I'm wondering if cultural influence played a role, like how many, like you said, there weren't as many Desi people out there, but there were a lot of Desi people and other Asian immigrants where I lived. So every summer, it was either you're going to India or you're in summer school of some kind. So like I'd be like exactly what you said. I'd be in writing camps, math camps, science camps. Like I was never not in a camp or I remember my dad would assign me essays before he'd go to work, and I would have had to have written like a full essay before he came back. And I was like, this is, and then also do like math problems. So there was always like work to do over the summer. And so I didn't get to like hang out with my friends. Like I don't have a memory over the like I would make new friends at summer school, and those would be my summer friends because I would see them every day. But then like I wouldn't see my friends from school for like the whole summer. So I guess it's like pretty like different than your experience, and that might just be like a location based thing. Kanchan, is that like at all similar to what you guys do?
Absolutely. I think I can totally relate to this idea of like still having like an academic like grind during the summer. Even starting from around like 4th grade or 5th grade, where I'd be a part of like a lot of sort of like local camps kind of to like sort of like practice math or writing before the next school year started. I think the way my mom kind of like justified that was this idea of like, oh, but like you'll fall behind. Like I think for my parents who grew up in India, they just wouldn't have summers that were that long. Like it just didn't make sense to them that like their kids wouldn't be in school for like that long period of time. And for them, they felt like, well, how are you going to like retain all of this information unless we're like having you do something else during summer? And that's
they're not wrong.
Yeah, they're probably not wrong.
Yeah, they're not wrong.
So yeah, I can definitely relate to your experience in terms of the camps and the summer activities for sure.
My parents did put me in dance camp, like that, but that was my request because I loved dancing, and it happened to be that I would go all year round, but my dance teacher at the time, and I learned kuchipudi, right? She would offer, summer camp for dance.
Right.
So that would probably be the one and only like camp that I actually did. But
oh my God, the classic thing I think about when you say that is that whenever I would ask to do something fun, and by my mom, okay, I feel like my parents were great. Like they weren't like being, assholes. They really like also did let me have fun. Like they would, my mom would one day out of the week take me to Raging Waters, which is like the water park, or like take me to Great America, or like I get to like hang out and have a sleepover with my friend. But like it wasn't like exactly like what Kanchan said. It wasn't every single day, and it wasn't for 3 months straight. It wasn't like I could just do whatever I wanted to do for 3 months. Like it was like you were still on a regular schedule where you have to be like also keeping up with whatever work they've decided for us to do, and then also like balance it with fun. But it was more work than fun, it felt like at the time. Now I don't really know my memory, if it serves me correctly, but I remember I'd be like, oh, can I do something fun instead of like, you know, writing or whatever. And they would respond with, the fun thing that you get to do is that you get to go to Kathak. The fun thing you get to do is that you get to go to singing. And I'm like, but that's still work. That's not fun. Like that's like an act. That's like a thing where I have to go use my brain. Can I like do something like fun where I can like turn off my brain? And for them, that the hobbies were the fun thing, right? So it's interesting, like they thought the balance of that would be like, okay, we're putting you in all these activities, like for you, like kuchipudi, and maybe that's like the educational element for you, but for my parents that was like the fun thing that I got to do, and I was like, that's not fun. Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. And I think it's also important, like, coming back to Kanchan for you, right? Out of like the different, classes or whatever, did your parents, and I guess Srishti, you can, jump in on this question too, but did you guys ever have to take like a language, like a Hindi class or like anything Desi related class? Because I know my cousin who is going to 11th grade right now, my niece, she's going to 11th grade right now. I know her mom put her in like Hindi class, like in addition to 10 million other classes too.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, did you ever have like a Desi educational component to anything?
Hell yes. More so in elementary school, I'd say, but yeah, we have these like once a week sort of like Hindi school sessions where we'd have like spelling bees and you would have to like memorize poems and like I still have like
What?
Classic spelling bee ritual.
yeah. I still have like videos somewhere in like a camera somewhere of like me as a kid having to like go up and give this like speech in Hindi to like a bunch of like random parents who are like kind of just only there for their kids. And yeah, no, I think I definitely hated it while I was in elementary school, but it's a good thing to like stick around with. Like I think like as a kid, like having to like pick up a language is always like hard and it kind of just seems like a lot of memorization, but it turns out to be super useful like later on when you actually have to like use the language. Like I still know a little bit of how to like read and write Hindi, and sometimes that's like handy when we go to India during the summer and stuff. So yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. I also, my dad actually taught Hindi. He would run a school himself. So,
Oh wow. You were that kid.
I was that
You
kid.
were that kid.
Which is why my Hindi's pretty good still. But like it's pretty frustrating when you're like 12 and your dad's like, okay, the whole weekend you can't speak in English and you have to write everything down. Well, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. But you know what? Literally the thing it's so funny. When you're a parent, you have to wait for so long before your child comes back to you and says, thank you for doing that, because now I'm really grateful that I have that information. But when I was that age, I was so ungrateful. I was so rude. And now I'm like, my poor dad, like it was so helpful. Like my Hindi is so much better than most people's. And it's literally because he forced me to learn it. And like lately I've been hearing parents talk a lot about like giving kids agency, and I think it'd be interesting to hear what you think about this, Kanchan, too, because you're still in that like age demographic, but it's like giving kids a lot of agency to decide what they like and what they want to do. But I truly think that as a kid, like you have to be somewhat pushed, because on your own you don't really think of all the things that are out in the world that you could potentially be interested in. And I think like especially culture, like the reason I'm so connected to my culture is because of a lot of the things that I learned as a younger person. And so now I can reflect back and like it resonates with me. I know that's true for you, Yashu. So I don't know.
Kind of on the note of like the Hindi lessons, this is such a random question to ask you, Srishti, but I just wanted to know, like, while you were learning Hindi, like, sort of in this like formal setting, is that when you kind of realized that there was a difference between like informal and formal Hindi? Like, this is such a random memory I had, but what made like learning, I don't know, sort of like Desi related activities and sort of like a rigid setting was that they're so much different when you want to do them outside of that setting. Like, I don't know, I picked up most of my Hindi from like, like watching Bollywood movies and listening to music. And it was like so almost like irritating as a kid to realize that it's completely different when you have to like learn formal Hindi and use like full sentences. And I don't know if you felt that difference too.
I think you're kind of right. Like I know that when I go to India, like they'll say that my Hindi is more proper than probably the Hindi that they use because they're using slang Hindi, which is like I wouldn't know slang because I didn't grow up there. So like in Delhi they use like Punjabi and Hindi, and then like in Bombay they use like Marathi and Hindi, and like Bihar they're using Bhojpuri and Hindi, and like so like there'll never be a case where my Hindi is like actually like authentic to the space, but I conversationally I can get by, right? So like I did find that like I watched a lot of Bollywood. I still watch a lot of Bollywood, and I'd watch all the shows, and then I would like learn it formally as well, and that really helped like contextualize. But I see what you're saying. It is very formal, and people pick up on the formality of the way that you speak when you learn it like formally. But Yashu, is that true for Telugu as well? I don't know.
So I guess here's where I had a very different background too. My parents never put me in any language camp. And I guess because maybe I come from a very orthodox Brahmin Telugu family, I would have to say that's what it had to do with. And then maybe also because all my relatives were in India, so nobody, like I didn't have any other family here, and I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. So being it's just me, my mom, and my sister and my dad, like just the four of us forever, basically. Me and my sister, probably until about high school, maybe for me, college, my sister, high school, Telugu was actually my better language. Like I would speak better Telugu than I would English. My English is weaker than my Telugu. So probably after college, my English got a little bit better. And maybe like now they're about even, or maybe even, maybe a little bit even. But for some reason, like my Telugu was like really good. So I never went to classes or had to do any of that. And then my slang as well, I'm not as perfect maybe in my slang as I am compared to like my Indian relatives who are like born and raised generationally in India. But if a lot of times if I go to India, they'll say that they can't tell the difference that I grew up here because I'm able to like fit right in.
Right.
So, but I don't know what is the contributor there. Is it because the way I grew up? It could be the way I grew up in India. I'm sorry, going to India and my family always, being there and knowing that they were from a village. They never spoke English, so always having to speak in my native language. Or maybe just, being in the culture so much. Like I said, I didn't really have a lot of like American exposure other than school. And I hated school. So I guess maybe because my foundation was always my Telugu household, that's comforting. Like, I don't know. That's kind of my
That's an interesting point. I think that's where like I wonder if there's like a generational difference here, because similarly for me, a lot of my family is, well, like this might not even be generational. It's like immigration. Like how many people had all of their family come here? I know that some families, a lot of Gujarati people like have like their entire families in the Bay, and I don't know how. But like my family doesn't have anybody here. So that's basically like one level of like you have to learn the language almost to like communicate if you care. Right? If you care to communicate. And I do think like similarly to you, like didn't have any real, like honestly, I didn't really have any white friends for a long time. And so I had like one or two I could like count on my hand even in high school. And so because of that, everyone was kind of embedded in their cultures. All of their parents spoke their languages to them. There was some element of like, you just learn it because everyone's doing it. And then also because when you go back to India, it's much easier to communicate with everybody, especially the village. Like if you're in a village, your family's from the village and they don't, like my grandma, none of my grandparents could speak the language. My aunts and uncles are more comfortable in Hindi. They'll speak in English, but it's like, it's a little bit more, or at least back then was a little more difficult. Now I see that they speak a lot more in English. So like over time, like their kids won't speak to me in Hindi because English is the language of how do I say it in a politically correct way? It's the language of luxury. So like if you speak English, you are well educated, you are well informed, you're intelligent, you're all of the things that people perceive you to be if you speak in English. So now they'll speak to me in English and I'm the one trying to speak in Hindi, and they won't speak to me in Hindi. And I'm like, but I want to practice, because the only way you get better at Hindi or any language, Telugu, whatever, is like when you speak that language, when you go there and you like are speaking it consistently. So I'm seeing the change. My Hindi has like definitely declined in its like fluency. And Kanchan, you don't speak any language, right? Like any like you don't, I don't remember. Just remind me.
So I speak Hindi, and then I also speak this language called Konkani,
Okay.
which is like this South Indian language. And it was actually kind of crazy growing up because I actually don't know, like I don't have any friends that speak this language. Like we're kind of a small circle, and I think that's the language where the thing is, my parents, although they also speak Konkani, they grew up in Mumbai, so I had more exposure with that language. But this is sort of the tongue that's just sort of like I've kind of lost a connection with it over the years.
So my uncle is Konkani, also from Bombay. But Konkani originated in Goa, right? It's like a Goan language. Yeah, he speaks Konkani. So if you want to learn Konkani, I'll connect you with my uncle.
Got you.
But it's
to go kind of off of what Kanchan was saying, like she said, I don't know where the like I lost it. I think that's a great question. At what point do you think, and I know now we're kind of diverting into like language, but we'll also bring it back into summers, right?
Sure.
At what point in your life, generationally or whatever, did you notice a change in your summers? Or because I had a very distinct stage at which like SAT prep, like then suddenly like, you know, high school started, life changed. College started, life changed. Master's, PhD, I haven't even been to India.
Yeah.
So like at what point in your lives did you guys start to see this kind of like disconnect from maybe your roots, in a sense, if that's a valid way of saying it? Whether that's language or even just like visiting India or whatever that looks like, or Desi country, whatever Desi country you're from.
For me personally, I think I can definitely relate to you in the sense that it kind of happened like with education. There's like this really weird connection between like me starting high school and also me feeling a little bit more detached from like my mother tongue and just like traditions and customs that I had kind of like grown up with in my household. Like, I don't know. I think I just grew up in one of those families that kind of like made like where education just sort of took precedence over certain other things, you know? And so for them, they didn't mind if I missed out on this random festival because I had SAT prep, or if I wasn't there to talk to my grandparents because I needed to go to like this practice for this extracurricular activity.
True, yeah.
And so it really just became about like time and priorities, and somewhere in like the mix of that, I kind of felt, you know, a disconnect for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I think that she's absolutely correct. I've never really thought about it that deeply, like where I started to let go of a lot of these cultural things. Because now I've almost come full circle and I'm back in it, but I definitely started at the same time as Kanchan, right? Like you're doing all, and I'm sure for you, I don't know actually for you, Yashu, if it was at the same time. But for me, it was definitely high school, because like you're right, like I wouldn't get to go to a party because I had to, you're saying you would choose. I don't know if you chose to do it. My parents were like, you don't get to go to the party. You have to stay home and study for your SAT. And I'd be like, no, but I want to go to the party. And they're like, no, you stay at home. So that's when like you start to like lose it. And then not only that, I moved to Boston for college, so I lost my language. Like that's a big thing for me. That was really really difficult because no one spoke Hindi. Really, and only the ISA, the Indian like club or whatever, would, but I didn't really connect with the people in that group, and they spoke like a mix of like maybe Tamil and like sometimes Punjabi, and so it wasn't even always Hindi, and like I just didn't really speak Hindi, so I lost my language a lot then. And then like you said, I didn't get to go to college while I was in college. I didn't get to go to India because every summer you're doing an internship or you're taking classes and things like that. So for like 4 or 5 years I didn't go, which before you were going like every other year or something. So 5 years I just didn't go, and I missed like cousins' weddings, and I missed a bunch of stuff because I was studying. And I gave up Kathak, I gave up singing, I stopped all of that. So I like really like disconnected. And then after college, I kind of had this space to be like, I've been really missing Kathak, so I went back to Kathak, and I went back to, I started like slowly going back. And when you're doing Kathak, you're reciting things in Sanskrit and Hindi and all the different languages, and with that, you kind of get back into it. So that really helped me. And then obviously working at India Currents is like the most I could be in it. So now I'm in it. What about you, Yashu?
I think for me, it has a lot to do with like identity shift. So for me, a lot of my attachment with my roots and the way my summers would look and all of that had to do with my identity. And I've always struggled with my identity being Indian American, but then being more Indian, as I used to call it. I would be more Indian than a lot of other kids. So for me, I just remember growing up, I would, like, even amongst the other ABCD kids, like, you know, we grew up with other ABCD kids, like, nobody would want to be my friend because I spoke better Telugu. And so, like, the aunties, I would end up sitting with the aunties. And then I grew up, like, completely different. So for me, like, the summers, the parties and everything, like, my mom would drag me out there even though I didn't want to go because she's like, well, what if the auntie's going to say you're not coming? I'm like, but Mom, like, no one my age is coming. She's like, well, no one your age ever comes. The aunties want to see you. And I'm like, yes, but then I also don't want to, you know, like, mingle with the aunties, but I would be dragged to mingle with the aunties too. And like, so for me, I would say like I had a very different like storyline, but when it comes to kind of like that mental change for me, I would definitely say like, of course, high school, I went through a, you know, whole issue in high school. So at that point, I was still very connected with my culture, but I wasn't necessarily, you know, I would say in high school I would. No. I would say high school I was definitely still very connected. I would go to India and stuff. But I think college, when college started, and then I started to like find people I identified with for the first time, now that I'm in this whole pool of like new people, other minority communities, because I grew up in a very white community, which I never fit into, and then suddenly I was exposed to these other, you know, cultures. That's when I started to see a real transformation. Then my want to go to India would no longer be that much, you know, relevant or whatever. But then in college again, my friends group, because I noticed the ABCD kids would never really want to be my friend. White kids didn't want to be my friend. So for me, I was like, okay, who's going to be my friend? So I ended up being friends with people who came from India. So that's how I picked up Tamil, right? So then I learned Tamil. So I had always just been so in the culture. Like we would like only cook Indian food. We would only watch Indian movies. We would only talk in Tamil in the house, like in my apartment. So it was just so Indian. So I think now, fast forward, like I'm doing my PhD, and I'm like, this is the first time I'm exposed to like non-Desi people. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of cool too. And I haven't been wanting to go to India. Haven't really been, you know, tapping in with my relatives as much. So maybe I'm just having that, what you guys went through, but a little bit later, because now I'm able to really explore the world other than my very sheltered home.
Yeah, I do think there's an element of obviously everything relates back to your identities and like us as like to having the split identity, like what it really means. And going to India, it's like such a tangible way of saying, oh, I'm Indian, right? Like you get to go and you get to like, you're in it, then you come back and you have stories. And actually, it's really interesting. I was talking to our other intern, Medha, and I don't know if she's still on this live, but she was on it at the beginning, and she mentioned to me that she lives in Las Gatos in the Bay Area, but Las Gatos is like a white area, and she's like one of two Indian people at her school. And after school, when she says she's going to India, people look down upon that. Like they'll like be like, oh, well, I'm going to Paris. Like, why would you go to India? That kind of thing. So it's like this identity, like questioning your identity, like, okay, well, I want to go to India. Why are you looking down upon that process? Or like, that's just who I am. I'm an immigrant from India. So you're basically saying, why are you going to India? That's weird. You should go to Paris. And so like, that cultural element, I mean, that's like a societal kind of lens on that, right? Like I'm sure that some of what you're facing and what I faced in Boston was that I was trying to understand what society expected of me, which was, am I supposed to be all these other things outside of just my Indian American identity? Because that's what I knew to be true of me, because that's how I grew up. Like that's what I know. Like it shows on my skin, it shows on my, I smell like Indian food. I look like an Indian person. Like, I do Indian activities. I love Bollywood movies. When people hate on Bollywood movies, that really pisses me off because I love them. As trashy as they can be, they're my favorite thing. Like, I swear, I hate some of the movies I watch, but I still like. I watch Gunday with Ranveer Singh, and it doesn't make sense. Like it's like kind of makes sense, but it's like crazy, okay? But I still love it. Like I love the element of who Ranveer is as a person is amazing, and I just love him so much. I'm just putting it out into the world. Ranveer Singh, if you're out there, definitely hit me up. But for all of
I
us,
have a generational question.
Yeah.
Just now because you brought up movies, and this is for Kanchan.
Yeah.
And this will kind of help me in my understanding as well, right? I want to know, like, what is if you had to say, like, the oldest Bollywood movie you've watched? And the reason I'm asking this is because, like, we also have to understand, Srishti, like, Kanchan's mom and dad are probably younger.
Yeah.
Of a different generation than our parents. Right?
Yeah.
And then even within that, like, maybe my parents might actually be a little bit older than your parents. I'm not sure. But, because my parents got married really late. So I know with my parents, like, I grew up watching black and white Telugu movies. In the car, we would listen to only black and white music. So for me, that's how, and back then in black and white, like, the Telugu is not as chopped up as it is now, right? Like nowadays, you have the more street talk, the Hyderabadi, the mix of Urdu and the Telugu. Like, you have that change in the language versus black and white movies was more, proper, maybe more relatable to the Brahmin Telugu that I'm very acquainted with. So I'm just curious to know, like, how, just talking about movies even, like, what's the oldest? Because I also know this, like, I remember kids would be like, ew, black and white movies? Like, people would, like, my mom would always
might be a little bit more evolved than that, though. A little more
I remember, like, my mom would tell me, my mom would be like, old is gold, okay? And, like, she would sit me down and make me watch these, like, black and white movies. So I'm curious, Kanchan, like, what's the oldest movie you've watched or relate to?
That's crazy that you actually brought that up because, I've always liked like the older like Bollywood movies. Like I don't know, I feel like Bollywood is going through this weird sort of renaissance. Like I feel like it's just me, but there was a point like around 2013-ish where like the plots would make no sense, but the songs would all be amazing. And so I just go to watch.
Race is a good example of this exact phenomenon. If you've heard the Race song, that movie makes no sense. Anyway, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right. Like movies like Race, movies like just the entire Race franchise is just a embodiment of like, let's have no plot but like 7 different amazing songs. So I'd really kind of just watch those, like that period of movies for like, the high budget element and like great dance, great actors. But
that's also when you were young. Like you were growing up on these movies because they were coming out when you were that makes sense.
Like the first ever like Bollywood movie that I watched in a theater was Om Shanti Om. Like I remember this because we had to fight for tickets because there was like such a long line. It was like the first day of release and like sharks in the movies. Like obviously everyone wanted to see it. But I remember like that was a very important time for me. When Om Shanti Om came out and I saw that like for the first time. But like we watched a lot of Bollywood movies like at home before that. Like the oldest, to answer your question, like Bollywood movie that I've ever seen is Parosan, which is actually black and white, but I got to see the color version of it.
They must have reimagined it with the color. They always re-release these things. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I remember they had like Saira Banu, who's like a wonderful, very talented actress in that movie, and the only thing I could focus on was I didn't really understand how like vintage hair is very different than like what it's like now, and I was just like, what is wrong with her hair? And, But yeah, no, Bollywood definitely has like a very, very like fond like place in my heart. It's exactly what you both said, you know. Like even if the movie is like terrible, even if like nothing makes sense, I'm still gonna stand by it. It's that like weird sort of loyalty because I grew up with it. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's very, very true. What is the oldest movie you watched, Yashu? I want to know if it's close to what I would th think would be mine. But yours might be in Telugu, huh?
Yeah, I never grew up watching Hindi, and my dad would not like it either. Not like it in the sense like he like because Hindi was always associated with like fast moving. Bollywood is modern, like So for him, it was always like Hindi movies was like like very westernized kind of thing. So for him, he would always like even in the car, like we would just listen to like old black and white Telugu songs, but I have watched almost every single black and white Telugu movie that the industry has made. Um, this was most of my life, and even now, I feel like if I had to say like my favorite pastime would be to watch 80s, 90s, and early 2000 Telugu movies. Like I don't like the new shit because it's again too like westernized, girlfriend, boyfriend, love, and all of that.
Every
But in the 80s
generation
and
is
90s,
gonna say that the next generation's films are too westernized. That's just what I've realized. That's just
and
always
I
gonna be
feel
the
like
case.
yeah, and I feel like even storylines were like funky and like, in my opinion, better and also lighthearted. No movies were like, killing or terrorism became a huge
Yeah.
theme in a lot of movies in the Telugu industry,
Right.
or like, rowdyism or, like gangs and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
growing up like, in the 80s and 90s, like movies would be about like, like an actor who lost his job and he hasn't told his wife yet, or someone who wrote a letter in the newspaper and then that letter, like if someone finds it and then now someone has, so it's just like these like different concepts. So I used to love and I still do, like that's literally my pastime. My lunch period is like no one is allowed to talk to me. It's just me and YouTube watching the old Telugu movie while I eat my 2 rotis and curry and then getting back to work. Like this is my regiment, So for me, like that is just a part that's just very deep. But to go back to honestly, probably the oldest movie that was ever made in Telugu that was black and white. Like I've seen them all.
Nice.
Yeah,
I've seen
I
them
think it's so. I also think like what we think about film, movie, music, a lot of that is based off of what our parents tell us. Also, when you're, I mean, like now you kind of like you decide, but when you're younger and like probably like Kanchan's age, like a lot of, I mean, Kanchan, I'm sure you're critically thinking, but I know that even when I was critically thinking, a lot of what I thought had a lot to do with what my parents would say, which would be the same thing. Like, oh, this 2000s music is crap. Like the 90s, the 80s and 70s and 80s were like the golden era of music, that's what they believed to be true. And I would believe, I was like, you're right, this music is trash. And we'd find like some songs from like Swadesh that are good, some songs from something else that are good. Like you'd have like those chosen songs from these films that are like, top of the top.
Yeah.
And I realized like over time that like, we adapt. Like I love all of those things. I grew up on those things, but I also like the ratchet shit that I hear now. Like it's okay. Like it's I think always like pushing like the next generation away is not the move, and that's why I try to embrace whatever new thing comes out, because like for example, like we need to understand like what Kanchan's viewpoint on this is actually. What do you think about like now that you've said you've seen Parosan and then you've seen like the newer stuff, like do you probably feel connected to the stuff that you grew up on, just like I feel connected to the stuff that I grew up on, even if it wasn't really, really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's always just that like that kind of like filter, that nostalgia just applies on everything. Like I can go watch like it's crazy. Like I can go and watch Om Shanti Om like right now and still just be like amazingly attached to that movie, even if it's just like a rip off of Cars, which is like an even older Bollywood
Older film, yeah.
Yeah.
So I saw Cars back in the day, and then they made this, And it gave me nightmares, that movie. That movie is
That's a
scary.
scary movie, okay? I do not blame you at all. When she takes off her wig at the end, I
Yeah,
was like, I was done.
so scary,
It
so
was I was
scary.
done. But yeah, no, there's always that sense of attachment that you have to like the things that you grow up on. As you said, like even if they're bad, even if you look back at it and think critically and you're like, what is this?
Yeah. Like Dil
But
Chahta Hai, like that is my that yours is Om Shanti Home. Dil Chahta Hai for some reason was like
yes.
the cusp of what I thought was like the best movie of all time. And I thought I was so like edgy liking Dil Chahta Hai, which by the way was not edgy because it won like a million awards. But
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Like I rewatch it, I still rewatch it, and I'm like, I love this. I could watch this movie like a million times and it would not matter because I just love it so much. But when I rewatch it, I still like, I'm like, okay, some of this is cringe. Like I've shown it to people I've dated that are not Indian, and they're just like, really? And I'm like, yeah, this is the best movie of all time. I don't know what to, I don't know what to tell you, man. And if you don't like this movie, we're not hanging out again.
Listen,
So I
I
have
fully
to,
support. I fully
yeah.
support. We've declared it. Dil Chahta is the best movie of all time. It
Well,
doesn't
like
matter.
for you, it's gonna be Om Shanti Om. Like for me, Om Shanti Om's like a newer film,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's not anymore. But
So I
okay,
have a
so
quick question. Oh,
mhm.
go ahead, Srishti.
No, you go.
What I was gonna say was like we've talked about film, we talked about language, but I did want to kind of like talk about just slightly deviating here. Just a memory from my summer that I think is super important. It's actually going to be a good lead-in to our following couple of episodes coming up, which is in my Desi summers, a big part of it would be my mom making pickles and or like achar and papadums, the Indian papadums that she would make, and she would like put them out in the sun like Indian style. Like I remember this was such a signature part of my summer because I used to be responsible for like making sure that it was covered up, or like we would have like check-in times that I have to go check that like no squirrel decided to come and like steal something. But I kind of wanted to talk about food as well because I think at least for me, like the summer foods were very different, especially because my dad was gardening. So summers were very special in the food department in my family. So I kind of wanted to touch on that and see if we can see if anyone had any similar connections there. Srishti, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you're talking about going to India, like I'm straight up eating some straight up Indian food, and then also the fruits. Like for me, going to India was so much about what fruits were available. So my grandfather was a botanist, and my mama, who is my mom's brother, still lives on that property, and what my nana used to do is he'd get seeds and he'd like germinate them and then he would plant them and then you would have produce like for the summer. And so my mama still kind of does that. He grows like a lot of things. So they have like a guava tree and mango trees and like all these different trees in their garden. And so with the mangoes, oh my God, it's all about the mangoes and the guava. Oh, I only said those two. Oh, and pomegranates. Those are my three. Like when I go to India, I would be like pomegranates, mangoes, and guavas. Get me as many as you can because I'm going to eat as much as I can while I'm here. And just every day I'd be like stuffing my face with fruit. I don't even like fruit that much, but those fruit, they just tasted so different. They were like straight from our garden or from someone's head. They would like bring it on their head and then I'd be like, I want that one. And then they would give it to me. So yeah, I mean, I definitely it was so exciting to get to have like that kind of food that I craved for like 2 years before I would get to have it. Or like I could request specific things like they would make like, so in Bihari culture, litti is like a type of thing. I don't know if you've ever had litti. So it's made out of, I think, some kind of like mix of besan flour and some other flour, and then inside of it is like some dals, like some types of dals. And what they do it's a litti choka, so they'll put it in like a fire, like those like little what are they called? Like just like in the ground, it's like burning, and then you wrap the thing in aluminum or like some kind of thing, and then you just put it in the fire, and that's how that thing bakes. And then you eat it with like this aloo and like some tomato chutney type things, and so it's like very specific. Yeah, I know, it's like a very specific Bihari dish, but it was like I can only get litti when I went there because that type of flour was like best. They didn't really like import it or export it. It was like really specific to Bihar. So like I would like go ready to like, and then they would feed me so much while I was there. So I was pumped, you know. So anyways, that's my summer. Kanchan, what is your summer food?
So for me, when we go to India, we almost always spend most of our time in Bombay because I mean, like my parents' are based there as well as like, you know, literally almost all of my aunts, uncles, cousins. So really, I kind of associate the food scene in India with kind of like the food that's like typical of like a metropolis. So a lot of the times it's like chaat, like street food.
Yeah.
Like I have such good memories associated with my aunt just like assembling like pani puri. I don't know if you've tried that before.
Yeah. I love pani puri.
Yeah, she would just make my whole family just sort of line up. It was a whole assembly line. And then she'd just like, you know, like rapid fire just start like assembling them and then we just go down like a conveyor belt eating them. And yeah, just like great memories associated with street food and also with like with fruit as well, like fruit and chai. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're in like chai from India, especially North India, but it is 100 times better than whatever we're getting here. Like
I know it's this process. It's this thing. They go like this like 5 times, and it just tastes better.
Yeah, but
sorry.
Yeah, no. Just like I try, as you said, like I just try to take advantage of like all of like the things that I can get in America. I'm just like constantly drinking chai throughout the day. I think another thing that I kind of associate with like just Indian food is I can't drink Indian water. Like do both of you also have to have bottled water?
Yes. Well, or like boiled water.
Yeah. Boiled. I remember like that was probably one of the most hardest things was that because especially growing up for us, we didn't have bottled water. So if we were coming from India, my aunts would boil water. And it wasn't until a little bit later that they even got refrigerators. Again, I'm from a village.
Yes.
So this shit would be hot on top of hot food. Like I would be like so pissed and it used to taste weird. So I really, that was one thing that was really hard. But then later, after they started getting refrigerators, like I remember I would have my own bottles, I'd fill it up and I'd put it in the fridge. And then now, of course, we have like the filtered water that's coming, so it's like better. But it still
water in India is like not potable. Like you should not. Anybody, pro tip: don't drink the water that people give you in India, and also don't eat the pani puri on the street. Don't do it. Kanchan got it at home. Don't do it on the street. I did it once and I didn't get sick, but that's the most dangerous thing you could have on the street, probably.
Yes.
Go on.
I think just off the point that like yeah, we'd either have to like boil or have bottled water. Maybe this is just once again like a Indian city thing, but did y'all have like times where there'd just be like, yeah, you can only have water between like 6 a.m. to like, I don't know, like 2 p.m. and then it's gonna turn off for a little bit. Yeah. So like get everything you need to do done before that.
Take your shower and shit.
Yeah. And then it would just fully go out for everyone for a little bit. Yeah. So I kind of remember just like obsessively.
That's nostalgic. The generators going on and like now everyone is like
going off.
Yeah, everything going off and then the generator going on. And everybody here is like, oh my God, the light went out. And I'm like, is that like we don't have generators here, which is
no problem.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Electricity go off, especially in my village, it would go off a couple of times a day, and it would go off like especially in like the times it would be the hottest, and the fan was everything. Me and my sister would fight for who can sleep under the fan, and especially with mosquitoes around and stuff like that, which was the worst. So all of that, but kind of coming back to food, you know, and I like how Srishti, you talked about these very specific like food that are, you know, the summer season, and you know, because we used to go to India during the summers, my mom would of course request her sisters to make, you know, some like special dishes, which are native to like Andhra and stuff like that. So we had some desserts. It's called like Aktirasam or Bobbatu, depending on which region. you're from within Andhra. So those are my favorite, and they're
Can you
so unique.
repeat? Can you repeat what it is?
It's made out of a special flour, but the flour has to have a very specific consistency to hold, and then you like put poppy seeds in it and stuff like that, and then you fry them, and it's called, in one part of Andhra they call it like artirasam, in another part of Andhra they call it bobbattu. So it's like the name changes from like, is it bobbattu? I could be wrong. No, I think it's bobbattu. I'm not sure. If any Telugu people are here, I'm sorry. But anyway, I figured, because I grew up on my mom's side, I didn't really grow up on my dad's side, so I only know the Rayalaseema Telugu, the Kannadiga influenced Telugu, because that's where my mom is from. So Artirasam I know is right. I don't know exactly 100% what it's called on my dad's side, but it has another name. But anyway, like those were something, and then like you were saying, like mangoes. I remember my dad, where he would go to India with us, like he would eat so many mangoes, because they would always, when my dad left India, like that was the memory about my dad that all of his brothers and sisters and relatives remember, that Sinappa used to love mangoes. So everyone would bring him mangoes, and he would just eat mangoes, and then my dad would have like diarrhea or something. So then my mom would be like, don't eat mangoes. So my mom would be very cautious. And then sapota. How many of you know sapota or chiku? Do you know chiku? Like
Chiku rings
the brown colored fruit?
Yeah. That rings
Oh
a bell.
yeah.
Yeah, so sapota is what we call it down there. So that was another big fruit, and that was very famous in my village, like my village that I'm from. So that was definitely a connecting piece there. But just, and then my dad, again, here gardening in the US, bringing a part of the culture here. We saw a lot. My mom would put pickle, like literally, I cannot lie, Srishti, my mom last week FedEx me, overnight shipping, FedEx me, like 8 containers, different pickles. She made celery pickle, like,
oh my God.
She's so inventive. Celery pickle, pineapple, like tomatillos. She makes pickles out of like tomatillo pickle. Like she's like brought the Indian to like the Western, and like, so my mom literally said, the other day I put like rice in the middle with ghee, and I had like a thali of just like pickles from my garden.
That's
and I
awesome.
been like,
that sounds delicious. Can I have some of your mom's pickles? Can she ship it to me? Actually, it's funny. So our managing director, our publisher Vandana, her partner is the managing director. His name is Vijay. He also likes like homemade pickle. So every time I go, I'm like, I go back with the same jar, and I'm like, can you give me more pickle, please? So he's always giving me all these different. That just reminds me of the same thing. It's like there's always like 500 different ways of fermenting like things, and I'm like, I didn't even know I could have celery pickle. Like, I've never thought of that.
It's amazing. And it's funny, like I remember one very specific thing. I know we're almost out of time, so we can wrap up with this thought. And like I said, guys, next couple of episodes, we are definitely diving into the topic of Desi summer foods and everything. So definitely tap in for that. But I just want to bring this kind of into light. My dad actually had initiated this sort of party culture in my Desi community in the DMV area, where he would take things from his village and like kind of bring them here. So what he would do is every summer we would have one patio party. It would be a patio party, but you're only supposed to bring, and again in Andhra, podi, which is the powder, the spice powders, you dip it. So there's so many different kinds. So he would call it a podi achar party. So it's a potluck, but you're only supposed to bring a podi or an achar or both, whatever you want to make at home and bring. And all you would have is rice, papad, and like ghee and oil. That's it. And so you would just eat podis and achars. Like that would be the whole theme of the party that we would have. So, and that's something that he kind of like brought from India, because I know in India we celebrate with, on some festivals with just pickles and podis and things like that. So that was something he brought, and that was a really important part of my summer season as well, which I think I need to reintroduce it. With now
you should be the torchbearer for this. Yes,
the brand ambassador.
Exactly, the brand ambassador. I want to wrap up what we've talked about, and I feel like we talked about so many different topics. but they all relate to the same thing. They're all about what we experienced over the summers, whether it was language, our identity crisis, our traveling to India, our foods that we got to eat when we went, the movies that we remembered from probably the times we had free time during the summer. So I think it's really important for us to continue these conversations and document like what, I'm sure like we're one generation, Kanchan is telling us a different story. I'm sure our parents have a different narrative of what they think their summers were. And I'd love to hear more about what other people thought. So if you ever are watching this, please put it in the chat, what your summer was like, and what you did. Kanchan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I hope your summer is fun this summer and you're not studying because you're finally going to college, so you should get to have a good time. Tell me you're doing one fun thing before I get off this live. What are you doing?
Absolutely. We are actually probably gonna do like a road trip. Like my brother's gonna come in from San Francisco and we'll just get to tour sort of like the coast of Cali before I head off to college. It'll be great.
That's beautiful. I love the coast. You're going like down Big Sur, like on Route 1 or something?
Yeah. That's what we're thinking of right now. It's still in the works.
Well, if you need any recs, I got you some. Thank you, Yashu, for your amazing insights. And tune in next week. Yashu has a really cool interview lined up for us, and we're going to learn more about food and the foods we can eat during the summer and like what they mean. Thank you, guys, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.